Everyone got a copy of that folder on their desktop? Excellent. Okay. So I just want to preface by saying that most of my experience with Photoshop is obviously in a web capacity. I have done a little bit of print work, but for the most part, I do it in regards to the web. There's also a million ways to do things in Photoshop, and every version they create more really cool tools that are shortcuts that kind of combine a bunch of things that were available in earlier versions of Photoshop into one much easier package. So I originally learned on Adobe Photoshop 6 to give you some idea, and I think we're on version 10 or 11 or 12 at this point. They changed the numbering system to CS1, CS2, CS3 long time ago. So I still have a couple of things that I do in ways that are perhaps a little old-fashioned, but there are a lot of ways to accomplish the same thing, and I'll be demonstrating what works for me. So first of all, go ahead and open Photoshop. Little PS blue box, right? This is Photoshop CS3. I think CS5 is the most recent version at this point, but for most basic image editing, if you've got CS2 or greater, you're in great shape. I was working on CS2 here until this past summer. So as far as what you see when you open up Photoshop, you're going to have a number of palettes. Now, I closed one of the default ones, color. I never use that, and I don't like clutter, generally speaking. You can leave it. It's up to you. I just immediately closed something that I knew I wasn't going to use. The palettes that I use the most often are this Tools palette right here, the Options palette, which actually is linked to the Tools palette. Depending on what you have selected in the Tools palette, it's going to change what's in the Options palette, okay? And then I use the Layers palette, which is this area down here. And that's pretty much the main three that I use on a regular basis. You can't even see this, can you? Let's see, can I move this over?
There you go. Oh,
Okay, well you can see half of it there. Huh. I'm not a Mac person, I'm a PC person, so this makes sense. About okay. Now you can see everything. All right. As far as the menu, I generally just use File and Image. The Edit menu has a lot of things like cut, copy, paste, and those are things that I usually use shortcuts for, like Control-C for copy, Control-V for paste, and Control-Z for undo. Since we're working on Macs, that's Command-C, Command-V, for any of you folks who are also PC folks. So the first file, I'm going to start out with us opening a photo. So if you go to File and Open, I want you to find in that Photoshop class folder, baby.jpg. Go ahead and open that. Now, when I'm working in Photoshop, I generally like to have a little bit of a margin around whatever I'm working on, and you can actually do that by just grabbing the corner and dragging in or out. And that's just me. When you open it, it's not going to have any margins. So I wanted to actually do a real example with, say, a faculty photo that you've been asked to crop and put into a faculty profile on a web page. But I couldn't find any faculty profiles, really, and I already had this baby picture laying around. So we're going to pretend this is a faculty member. Now, I want to say, if you're going to be making image corrections on a photo, you generally want to start with the highest quality photo that you can. And you always want to scale a photo down in size and quality. You never want to scale it up. So generally speaking, if you're going to be doing anything in Photoshop, you want to have the best, largest file size you can have to start with. This file right here is actually a lot bigger than it shows on this screen. You can see, here's the file name, and it says at 25%. To get an idea of how big this photo actually would appear on a web page, you actually need to go and make this 100%. And you can actually zoom in and out using Command+ here. So so this is how big this actually would appear on, say, a website. If someone was looking at that website and they had a screen at the same resolution that my screen currently is. So obviously that would be a very, very large photo in a website. And we're going to be saving this as it would be appropriate for a website later on. But you can obviously see we're starting with a much larger photo than the final one for the website would be. So if you guys want to practice zooming in and out, it's Command+ and Command-. And it's a really useful little tool. I love shortcuts. Shortcuts are great. So we've got a large photo, and while this baby is really cute, this photo could probably be just a little bit brighter, a little dark. It's a little difficult to see on there, but hopefully you can see it on your own screen. So while I'm not going to get into a large amount of image correction today, I do want to cover one quick trick. Do you have a question? Okay. So we're going to go to the image menu, and under adjustments there are a bunch of different possibilities, and what I want you to pick is auto color. Okay, and this just really brightens up the image significantly. Better contrast, better color. If you had a photo that was taken under fluorescent lights in a slightly dark room, a number of the little automatic adjustments under image and adjustments, auto levels, auto contrast, under auto color. In the newer version, there's also auto tone, which I like even better. These are useful little tricks. And you can actually do this manually, but Photoshop does a pretty decent job with its automatic corrections.
Would it darken it if it was too light?
This particular one might not. One of the problems if a photo is too bright is that the data isn't there to be corrected. If it's too dark, it doesn't mean that it's been blown out, but if you take a photo and it's too light, any of those white areas don't have photo data to really correct it. So you're better off with a dark photo and correcting from there than you are if you take a blown out photo and you're trying to restore areas that truly don't have image data. Yeah, and that was a great question. I've run into that problem many times. Now I want to say that this was a destructive correction. Once you make that correction, you have actually altered your original image in such a way that you've lost some data. So if you were going to make that correction, I would definitely suggest that you save this as a separate file name, because you can never go back. Once you save this and you close it, you can never go back to what the image was originally. I'm going to talk a little bit more about non-destructive changes later. But this is a very simple change. Let's say you're in a hurry, you've been given this photo of a faculty member, they want it on their website, and it looks green, and you just want to have a quick, easy, 2-second, let's try this fix. If it doesn't improve the photo, I generally will go auto color. Okay, that didn't really do it. Auto tone. That didn't do it either. Auto levels. Whichever one looks the best, I go with it. Quick, dirty, save for web. I'm done. All right, so let's talk a little bit about size and resolution. So if you go to the image menu again, there's this option called image size. Now, when we're talking about anything that's going to be used on a screen, like on the web, the only thing you care about is pixels. You definitely don't care about inches. The current iPhone, I think, is 480 pixels tall. This monitor right now is displaying at 600 pixels tall, and obviously is a lot taller than an iPhone screen. So inches don't really mean anything when you're talking about a screen, just pixels. And pixels are little dots of color, in case you've ever seen like screen resolution will generally be like 1200 by 768 pixels. That's how many dots of color are on your screen. So right here, this 1200 by 1600 pixels, that's really all we really care about right now. This icon here means that constrained proportions is checked, which is down here. If you are resizing an image, you pretty much never want to uncheck constrained proportions. By constraining proportions, it means that if I change the height of this image to 500, the width changes in proportion to how I change the height. And if you have that unchecked, you're going to end up with a really, really, really skinny person or a really, really, really fat person, but it will be a distorted image. And generally, you don't want to distort images. There are some cases I've seen where, say, someone's touching up a supermodel photo and they actually do want to distort the proportions slightly, but generally speaking, when you're working with photos and resizing for the web, you want to keep the proportions exactly like the original photo. Now I want to talk a little bit about this resample image. I'm going to go back to my original size. If I uncheck resample image, I can no longer play with these pixel dimensions, but I can still change the document size, which is the width and the height. If I change the width here and I make it less, you'll notice the resolution goes up. Resolution is the proportion between pixel size and document size. So if you have, pixel is the actual size of the image. That's what you care about. It's 1600 pixels wide. But if you say you want to print it at only 7 inches, it's got to divide that 1600 pixels into 7 inches. And whatever you get pixels per inch, that's the result. Okay? So when you're working on a screen, you don't care about resolution either. You don't care about resolution, you don't care about document size, you only care about pixel dimensions. Now, you'll notice you can't change pixel dimensions when resample is unchecked. When you resample an image, you're asking Photoshop to either create pixels or remove pixels. So you're either creating data or removing data. If I resize this down to 500, somehow Photoshop has to say, okay, I had 1600 pixels, and now I have less than a third of that. I need to have something that looks, result-wise, like the same photo it was, but with a third less, or only a third of the pixels. So it has to selectively remove. If you size up, you're actually asking Photoshop to make up image data. Based on the pixels that are currently in the image, fill it in with what you think those pixels should be. And that's when you end up with pixelated images. Because Photoshop, even though it's really, really good at what it does, it's not going to be able to create the same level of quality that you can get when you actually take a real photo at a large size. And so it will be slightly pixelated. And the larger you size a photo up, the more you're asking Photoshop to make up data. And it can only do so good a job. So you always want to size down. All right, so as I said, since we're constraining proportions, we only have to set width or height. So I'm going to set the width to 300 pixels and click OK. Okay, and now this is at 100%. So you can see that this is the size the photo would appear on, say, a web page. if they were looking at it on a monitor like the monitor I'm looking at it on. Now, by resizing it, we didn't change the height to width ratio of this photo. And we haven't changed, like, we haven't just done a headshot of this baby. We're just taking the original photo and making it smaller. So I want to go ahead and save this for web and show you how to do that. So if you go to File, there's this Save for Web and Devices. They've changed the name of this over the years, but if you just look for Save and Web in the name, you'll be good. Now there are a couple of ways to compress an image for the web. First of all, you're generally going to need to save it as a JPEG, a GIF, or a PNG. And it'll only be one layer deep. So when you compress a file for the web, it's only going to be one layer. And that, I'll get into layers in a little bit. The default for me was GIF. I don't know if it's the default for you guys, but for a photo, you generally want to save it as a JPEG, not a GIF. And it has to do with what the compression, how it actually works. For a GIF, the way it compresses a photo is it limits the number of colors in the photo. And when you're dealing with a photograph, there are a lot of gradients, and you really don't want to limit the specific number of colors. Also, a GIF has a maximum number of colors of 256, and there was probably more than 256 individual colors in this photo anyway, so even if you did it with hardly any compression at all, it would look pixelated. But JPEG uses a different algorithm, so if you're going to save a photo for the web, you want to save it as a JPEG. Now there are cases when you'd want to save something as a GIF. A GIF allows for transparency, as does a PNG, but I'll get into that. PNG is better, but it's not supported yet. PNG transparency is not supported yet by IE6, and surprisingly, there are still people using that browser. So a lot of times I still save as GIF in the case that I need transparency. Or I decide that I really don't care about those people who have IE6, and I save it as a PNG and it looks a lot better. Again, that reduces the set of colors, so a case in which a GIF would be very appropriate is a logo. If you've got a logo, it's got 2 or 3 colors in it, and you need it to have a transparent background, GIF's great. So is a PNG. Alright, I can't really see the bottom of this, but I want to point out, this is something, if you wanted to skip the image size step, when you save for web, you can actually designate how large you want to save it for. So I could actually set it to 250 wide right here. I did want to show you where you can find image size and information about your image elsewhere, but one of the nice things is they added this in one of the more recent versions of Photoshop so that you can actually change the size of your photo right here when you're saving it for web. Any questions so far? Again, you've got your constrained proportions checkbox that you don't want to touch.
I have a question. Other than kind of compressing the size of the picture, what are the benefits of saving for web versus just saving?
So that is the main advantage. When you're saving anything for the web, you want it to be as small as possible so that it's got a quicker download for your end user. The other thing is you don't want to put really high quality images on the web because people will be able to copy them. So for your own protection, you don't want to put beautiful raw artwork that someone else can then use and create derivatives of. The other thing that it does when it compresses, so there's an algorithm that compresses the image, but it also strips all the metadata on this image. So when you take a picture with your camera, generally speaking, there will be things like lighting conditions, author, when it was taken, a lot of other information that's not necessarily in the display of the image but saved. If you're working in a Word document, usually it'll put the author, maybe some information about from your PC, whatever. And that's all metadata that does get stripped when you save for web, and it makes the file smaller. So if you look at, say, the 4 up here, the original was 352K, and if I save it at 60% quality, save for web for JPEG, it's 29K. That's a pretty gigantic difference in file size. And when you're talking about downloading this, I mean, that's a lot faster download, and your users will be a lot happier, especially if you've got a lot of photos on your site. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, I'm going to save this under a different name, and you always want to do this because you never want to save your saved for web image as your original, because you lose your original, assuming you started with a JPEG. So I'm going to go ahead and save this baby-web. When you're naming files and you're planning on using them on a website, generally speaking, you want to stay away from spaces and you want to stay away from special characters. So dashes, underscores are great for representing spaces. I personally use lowercase letters everywhere, but it doesn't matter if you use uppercase. I just like to be consistent. I'm going to go ahead and save this to the desktop. Any questions so far? All right. Now, let's say that this is a faculty member and that you have been asked to create a Head and Shoulders profile picture for this faculty member. And maybe the faculty member is in a foreign locale and there's a lot of activity going on in the background. This is not unusual. If someone hands you some personal photograph that they took with their camera, often there will be a lot of other stuff that you want to crop out of that photo. So we're going to cover cropping. Now there is a crop tool in Photoshop. I will admit I never use this tool, but it is a legitimate tool, so I'm going to go ahead and show how to use this. So you'd select the crop tool from the tools panel, and then you click, hold, and drag. And to crop, I believe you just hit return. Yes. And you can adjust with the little, like once you've got it selected, you can adjust your crop. The things that I'm not crazy about with this is that it's not immediately obvious. If you need to crop something to a specific ratio or specific size, or you need to make any other adjustments, the way I generally crop is I use the select tool, which there's a rectangular marquee tool. And you're going to use selections for a million other things in Photoshop, so the problem is I almost always have it selected already, and it's much easier for me to just keep using that tool that I'm using elsewhere for other reasons than to go specifically to the crop tool. So I want to talk a little bit about the options menu here. The defaults are usually pretty good for the options menu, but if you happen to be working on a computer where you've been doing some more esoteric work, or someone right before you was doing more specific work, the options may not be ideal. So as I said, when you pick a tool, it changes what's shown in this option menu up here. And this first is regular select. This is add to selection, subtract from selection, and give you an idea. If I select with the first one and then I make another selection, it removes the first selection. But if I pick this one, I keep adding to my selection. And if I pick the subtract from selection, my next selection subtracts from what I already have selected. This is the intersect, so if I select this, it only picks the intersection. That comes in handy at various times, but if you're getting weird results with your selections, the first thing I would do is check and see what you have up here selected. So I usually stick with add to selection, but regular select works fine. To deselect is Command D, another little shortcut, or Control D if you're on a PC. Feather in this case actually has to do with the feathering of the edge. When you're going to be cropping a photo, you always want feathering to be 0. But if for some reason you were creating a design where you were wanting a feathered edge around, say, an oval portrait, that would be one way of creating a feathered edge around your selection. Style normal is generally what you're going to want. However, one of the advantages you do if you're cropping with the select tool is you can actually set a fixed size. So let's say I want to crop this to 100 pixels by 100 pixels because every other faculty profile picture is 100 pixels square. So then if I do this, that is 100 pixels square. I know it's 100 pixels. Now, that probably would be a terrible, terrible crop of this photo to put on a website, but it's often useful to be able to do a fixed size. Let's say I want a fixed ratio, 1 to 1. I get a perfect square. Okay? Command D to deselect. But generally normal will work for most purposes. But you can select, and then in the image menu, there's crop. And that sometimes comes in handy because you might have something selected for some other reason and you want to crop to that selection. Once you have something selected, you can also copy and paste it into something else. So I have this selected right now. So if I wanted to do Command C for copy, and I create a new, I can do Command V to paste that into a new document. Whenever you have something in the clipboard, let's say you've copied something, the default new size for a new document will match the dimensions of whatever you have on the clipboard, just as I mentioned. So for example, if I was going to do, I'm not exactly sure how to do a print screen on a Mac, actually, now that I think about it.
Command Shift 3.
Command Shift 3? No.
And I think it's on, is it on the desktop?
Maybe?
Do you see it behind your layer?
Oh, is it the F3? Command Shift F3? No.
No. You see it on the desktop? It makes a copy and puts it on the desktop.
Oh, so it won't copy if you're in an application?
Correct. It just saves it to the desktop.
Well, that seems sad. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It copies it here. All right, well, it works differently on a PC. If you do a print screen on a PC, it doesn't actually save it anywhere. But if as soon as you open Photoshop and you do a paste, your next paste is the screenshot. Just in case you guys ever are in that situation. I find myself in that a lot, but. Okay, so this is the way you would handle if you need to create or alter the dimensions of the photo, the ratio of height to width. You'd have to crop the photo. You can't do that just by resizing the photo as much as you may want to. So if you have a photo that's not the correct ratio for where it needs to live on the web, you are going to have to lose some image data and crop it to a different ratio. I run into this problem quite a bit with folks that I'm supporting because they want the photo in its entirety, but it needs to fit a place in the website that it doesn't match in dimensions. So, any questions so far?
Is there a way you can show what the feathering effect looks like?
Yeah, let me go ahead and deselect this. So let's say, I don't use this a whole lot on myself, but if I feather this, I'll do this, and then I copy this, the way I think it will work.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Okay, so that's, you can actually copy something with a feathered edge, right? This comes in handy for other purposes, but that was the one that immediately sprang to mind. But it basically, you generally don't want a feather because you actually want a clean crop of a photo. Right. So I've covered a couple of things I know I didn't cover in that other class, so I've been trying to mix it up a little bit. All right, so I want to talk about layers. So far what we've done can really be done in Photoshop or like Adobe Elements or just about any. You could probably do most of it in Paint because we only talked about cropping and resizing, and we haven't talked about having any layers that we're working with. All of these are already flattened images. So to talk about what a layer is, when you open something in Photoshop, it will always have at least one layer. So if I create a new document, and I'm going to go ahead and make this like 800 pixels by 600, and resolution, take care of it. All right. So if you look at this, I created a new document. It's got a layer already called background, and it shows that it's completely white and it's visible. You can so you can create a new layer. Whenever you create a new layer, and it's this icon right here next to the trash can, you'll notice, generally speaking, it's got this checkerboard background. The checkerboard indicates that it's transparent. So with layers, whatever's at the top obscures anything below it. So if I add a square here, I'm going to go back to my selection tool, my rectangular marquee. I'm going to create a selection, just like I did before. And I'm going to grab the paint bucket, and I'm going to fill this. It'll always use whatever the top color is selected here. I'm going to go ahead and deselect. You'll notice this black square obscures the white background for wherever it is. So if I make it invisible, there's a little eyeball next to each layer. If I make it invisible, you can see the white background behind it. If I make it visible, it obscures what's behind it. If I make another layer, and I make a red square, notice I have layer 2 selected here. That red square will obscure any areas that intersect with the black square behind it. And again, Command D to deselect. If I make that layer invisible, you can see the full black square. If I click on layer 1 and drag it above layer 2, now the black square obscures any areas that overlap with the red square. One way of kind of thinking about layers in this case is each one is a thin, transparent page, kind of like an old anatomy textbook with like the different organ systems, and whatever's on top obscures everything below it, but all the other areas of each layer are transparent. So unless there's actually something that's opaque and obscuring things below it, things will continue to show through. You can also adjust the opacity. This is why I mentioned the opaque of each individual layer. So if I have layer 1 selected here, and you'll notice it's selected because it's got blue, and it does matter what you have selected, because you can usually only affect things that are in the layer that you're working in. So if I have this and I want to move something, I can only move things that are in the layer that I currently have selected. So if I want to move this black square over here, I can't move the red square while I'm in the black square layer. Okay. But I can change the opacity of this layer, this whole layer. Up over here it's currently 100% opaque. Let's say I want to make that 50% opaque. Then you can see a little bit of the mixing of the red behind this black square, and it also mixes in with the white of the background. I use adjustments for opacity all of the time in designs. Any questions so far? No? It's worth mentioning that if I do like a Control or Command A here, and I do a select all, and then a Command C to copy, and I open a new document. Oh, apparently I didn't actually copy anything. I can only copy what's in the layer that I am currently in, because that's all that's actually selected. Now, if you actually want to copy the whole document, as though, like, as it looks here, you actually have to copy merged. And then you can copy it as though it's a flat document and move it someplace else. Otherwise, you have to duplicate each layer individually. All right, so that was just kind of a demonstration to get you kind of comfortable with the idea of layers. Any questions immediately?
I'm sorry, I missed the part how to move.
Oh yeah, sure. All right, so I'm going to move to, go ahead and deselect. I'm going to change to layer 2 here, which is my red square. And then there's actually this, this icon right here, actually, it allows you to drag and move objects. In this case, since I don't have anything selected in this layer, I'm moving the whole layer around. All of these, if you hold, will have additional options underneath them because otherwise the tools panel will be overwhelming. So they try to group things into logical groups. In this case, the gradient tool and the paint bucket tool both function very, very similarly. They're both filling a selected area. All of your different shapes for making selections are under the same tool, so that elliptical marquee is underneath the rectangular marquee. But almost all of these have additional options.
Sometimes it tells me the layer's locked. So how do I unlock it?
So that's this icon right here. And it usually has the, like the bottom layer is almost always locked and you can't really do anything with that. To lock a layer, there's this little lock key and you can unlock it right here. And it does come in handy if you want to make sure that you're not editing a layer inadvertently.
My layers all stayed on a background.
Okay, you have to actually create new layers to, so if you just create new squares, it will only continue working in whatever layer you have selected.
Nice.
Now, one of the big advantages of layers is the fact that it kind of separates your work out. If you do everything in the same layer, you put all of these squares in there, and suddenly you decide you didn't want the red square, you're going to have to delete that slowly and painfully, especially if there's a bunch of other stuff in that layer. But if the red square is all by its lonesome in its own layer, you just remove that layer. Or you make that layer invisible, because maybe you're going to change your mind and you want the red square back.
Could you repeat how you make a layer invisible again, too?
There's this eyeball next to each layer indicates layer visibility. So if you remove the eyeball, it makes that layer invisible. All right. So I want to go into a couple of practical applications of layers. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm going to go back to my original baby file. So hopefully you guys haven't saved baby differently. You should have saved it with a different file name, so you should have your original baby file. So I'm going to go ahead and open that back up. Now remember how I mentioned that when we made that first adjustment to auto color, that it was a destructive change? I want to show you how to do it in a non-destructive way. So it was destructive because it was all in the same layer. So there was no separation of your adjustment from the underlying image data. You were just on that background layer making an adjustment and changing the colors in that layer. And as soon as you save that, you lose your original. There are things called adjustment layers. So there are regular layers, which you can put new content in. And then there are these adjustment layers, which is this pie chart, black and white icon here. And there are a couple of options. They've actually improved this. This is one of the areas where newer versions really do add additional options. But I'm going to demonstrate levels. And levels, there was an auto levels along with the auto color. And there's an auto option in your adjustment layers. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the auto option. Now you can see this created a new layer on top of the background layer. So if I make this layer invisible, I still have the original image data that was in this baby JPEG, unaltered. All the adjustments are in this layer, this little semi-transparent adjustment layer that's sitting on top of the photo. Really cool thing about adjustment layers, you can control their opacity too. Let's say I think this auto levels was a little too extreme, and I only want it to be 80% opaque. I can go back in and I can manually mess with this adjustment layer. When you do a destructive change directly on the photo itself, aside from undoing it, you can't go back and adjust exactly what settings you used. So adjustment layers are great. I wish they actually had an auto color adjustment layer. It's really unfortunate that that's not currently an option. But a lot of times auto levels will give you a lot of the same results. Now, if I was to save this now, you'll notice the extension is PSD because now I have multiple layers in this document. So to actually save all of the information, it has to save it as a Photoshop document, which is a .psd, versus the compressed JPEG that this photo was originally. Now, even though it wasn't saved for web originally, the fact that it was a JPEG means it was a compressed file. It may have still had metadata associated with it, but it was still only one layer. So if you are actually saving something with layers, it has to be a Photoshop document. Any questions about that? Practical application of layers? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then I have one more document, and then you guys can ask questions if you have any. We're going to be going a little bit more in depth about layers next week. A little bit of photo retouching, talk a little bit about vector graphics. But I kind of wanted to, I've got 10 minutes, I'm good. So there is a Photoshop document called Example Layout. Now this is actually kind of a much cleaned up version of a Photoshop document that I actually used for a website. I really simplified it here. We might look at the original next week, but I wanted this to be a little bit less overwhelming. So if you go over to the layers, I'm going to go ahead and close the navigator because I want to see more layers. You can see I have a background layer that I've named background. I'm going to go ahead and make all the rest of these invisible so you can kind of see. So here's my background layer. And then I have this layer that I called white boxes. And you can name your layers. By default, they will be numerically incremented. But you can name them, and I would severely suggest that you name them, just so that when you go back and you open up a Photoshop document you've been working in, you have some idea of what each layer is containing. I've applied an effect called a drop shadow to this, and I can get into layer effects at some other point, but I just applied a drop shadow to that. You can see that the white boxes obscure the background behind it, and then I added in this placeholder for a photograph with text, and you can see the text is on top of the placeholder for the photograph, which is on top of the white boxes, which is on top of the background. Each one building on it itself. This is actually a group, and this is another way of organizing layers. You can actually create groups of layers. So in the document that this is originally, I have like a content layer, I have a header layer, I have a footer layer, I have a background layer, group for each of those with about 4 to 5 layers in each. It just makes it a little bit less overwhelming. This is all organization. And then this is just a logo layer. Now, what I want you to do as an exercise, if you look at this, you can't really see it very well there. This photograph area is 555 pixels by 330 pixels wide. And I have another file in here. And I would like you to make this photo fit into that layout and put it where it would need to be in the layers for it to show up appropriately. I'll give you a hint. You're probably going to want to resize the photo first, then you're going to want to crop the photo, then you're going to copy the contents of that as a new layer into the layout. And that should be above the placeholder and the placeholder text. All right, and if you have questions, let me know. Not necessarily for this, because we're just going to be copying this as a new layer into the other document. So basically, you want to take this photo, resize it, and crop it so that it'll fit in the space in the layout of the other document. So reminder, to resize an image, go to image size. And because the width is greater than the height here and your original image is a square, chances are you want to set the width.
What are the units for this thing? Pixels?
Exactly. Right. The only thing I would suggest is move, like grab the layer and move it above the photograph here. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Now, yeah, and then you might, you can take and just let that layer, and then use your,
Just said to resize and then crop.
see, to get it exactly. You can use your arrow keys.
I'm sorry, it's just, what is the units for this? Is it pixels?
Yes. Again, pixels are the only thing you ever care about. You don't care about anything else, ever.
So why is this so small? This
Yeah, I was just
Okay, so you don't have constrained proportions checked. No, now it's too late at this point.
okay.
So undo everything.
I have to do
Control
it.
Z, Control Z, Control Z,
Okay.
Command Z.
If I check it, I can't use like 5, 5, 5,
Right. Exactly. That's why you have to resize it, then crop it. To change, because to change the ratio of height to width, because this is originally a square, right?
Right.
But you want to make it a rectangle,
Yeah.
you need to keep constrained proportions checked, because otherwise you're going to get squishy people.
So how about the scale style thing?
No, just leave it as default. So if it was checked,
Oh,
leave it
default
checked.
is changed.
Okay, so go ahead and change that. Right. Now, the second thing you're going to have to do, you're looking at it at 25% size, so you probably want to zoom in. So Command plus. Command plus. There we go. Oh, and you want it at 100%. Yeah, exactly. Now, then you want to crop it to that exact size. Now you can use the selection tool to make your style fixed size, and then put in your dimensions there. Width of 5.5, height of 330. Okay.
Oh, how do you move the actual image
Okay.
from here?
Oh, so you first, so I would do Control Command Z, undo the whole thing. Yeah. Okay. So So you need to be in the layer that you want to move. So in this case, you want to be in your picture layer.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Because you can only affect what layer you're in currently. Okay, now it looks like we squished them. Because you can't actually, you're going to have to crop it to change the height to width ratio. So what you're going to want to do is do an undo a couple of times back. And you can always do Command Z, Command Z.
So change the style.
Now you're going to have to, you've got more than, oh, there we go. We're there. All right, so when you change the undersize, make sure you keep it. It's not in the portions always checked. Right, exactly. And remember, you're not going to change the ratio of width to height. So if you change your width, leave height alone. So that's all you need to change.
So it's always going to make its own.
That's what I'm saying. You can only change the width because the width, the height will change in proportion. Yes, exactly. So you leave that and then hit OK. Okay, and the next thing you need to do to change the height to width ratio is you need to crop it. So you're going to need to select your size first and then crop it.
Okay, yeah, I've read that.
Yeah.
Is this one? It's
So first you're going to go to the select size. Let's look at the size of this because you're looking at it, it's going to be tiny right now. So
We're gonna practice next Friday, and then I'll let you
there
know
we go.
whether
Let's
you'll
get it looked on the screen.
be
There we go. All right, and then go to your rectangular marquee tool, which is the second one down here. All right. Set your style to fixed size in the options menu. See where it says normal? So fixed size. Go to set your width to a specific pixel size. In this case, 555. And your height to a specific size. 330. And then you're going to go ahead and select it. Now that's what the crop would look like in that case. Now if you want to deselect and you want to crop something different, Command D. Okay. And then to crop it, you go to image crop. And then you want to Command C to copy it and paste it into the other side. You can delete the layer, yeah. I mean, you could select all and delete, but if the layer doesn't have any other useful information in it, you might as well delete the layer. You know, just to keep your, there's no real point in keeping an empty layer because you can always create a new empty layer. How are we doing? So if you look at this, go ahead and close out your swatches here and close out your navigator so you can see this. See this right here? Move this and drag it down. This is the border of the layer. So it's right down how the cursor is on top of the understand this is right here, which is on top of this gray box. Which is on top of the white box. That's running against the background. So you currently have your photo layer and hold and drag that up and down to move it in proportion to what's on top. So, and what you do is hold down.